And we're back again. Hello. And we are making us up for the last sessions with 2 speakers. So this is really nice. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the session. I think nowadays everybody should use infrastructure as code. So yeah, I think Project Bicep is looks really promising, and I think it really is going to make our work easier on building ARM templates. So I'm really looking forward to see it in action. Hopefully, maybe don't know what you're going to do, but but how did you came across this Project Bicep? Is this something you already used, or?
Yeah, well, I personally started using it when it was at the 0.1 version back in August last year. I saw a session at, I think it was Ignite or some other conference where they showed it at first. So I thought, well, this is really interesting because I have like 3 or 4 years of experience with building ARM templates, and I know how complex it is, and we'll get into that in this session as well. But that's when I first saw the power of these two and how it really empowers the actual JSON template, as we'll see in this session as well. So yeah, really excited about it. How about you, Esther?
Well, I have to admit that I just panicked with my ARM templates not performing without giving away too much spoilers. So I just called up Freek, and then he came with this awesome solution called Project Bicep. So that's how our story started.
Right. Cool.
Well, really nice. Well, yeah, I would say take it away and have fun.
Yeah, let me just see if I can quickly share my screen. Hopefully that should work without too much problems. Always need to figure out which screen.
How many screens do you have?
Now 3, and now I cannot find. Okay, there it is. So this should now show the presentation.
Yeah, it shows the agenda. Yeah,
yes.
There we go.
Let me get back to the right order.
Great. So yeah, thank you for having us. First of all, happy to be here to speak at this conference at the user group again. I think we both have been here before, Esther.
Yeah,
presenting.
I did a session once, but that's a long time ago. So.
Okay. So the next 45 minutes will be about ARM templates, JSON templates, like we said, but also Project Bicep. So we'll see how it actually empowers your existing infrastructure as code solutions, projects, etc. Quick introduction to myself. My name is Berson. I'm from the Netherlands. I primarily work with application and desktop delivery using remoting technology. So not so much in the ARM and JSON space directly, but more in the RDS, VDI, remote app, and of course Windows virtual desktop space. But I like to do a lot of automation, infrastructure as code as well. Have been an MVP for many years, and well, excited to be here to share some knowledge with you guys today. So with me is Esther. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I've been an end user computing consultant for over 20 years. So I have a lot of experience creating virtual desktops, which definitely comes in hand in these times that are challenging. But for the last couple of years, I kind of shifted to more automation and automated deployments. So I've been happily discovering ARM templates, REST APIs, working with JSON, and thanks to Freek, also ready to get started with Project Bicep.
Great. So let's dive right in and take a look at the agenda that we have for you guys today. So we'll start off by doing a quick introduction into automation in general, and where this is in the overall architecture of Azure in this case. Then we'll take a look at ARM templates and JSON. So we'll see some of the challenges with that, some of the power of those templates as well. And then we'll transition to the actual Project Bicep stuff. As we'll see, we'll build upon the existing ARM and JSON configurations, templates, and existing projects that you have. And a lot of demos. So you asked for this action. We sure have that in this session. So we're going to do all these demos live. So it's going to be fun. And yeah, hand it over to you, Esther, to do the introduction first.
Yeah, sure. So we figured to better explain the whole automation and where Project Bicep comes in, we needed to start at the root. So we're going to just have a quick introduction on Azure Resource Manager. The reason why we want to focus on Azure Resource Manager first is because it's basically the heart of Azure. So each and every way that you communicate with Azure, whether it's through the portal or through CLI or PowerShell, the different SDKs that are available, or your REST APIs, you will always hit your Azure Resource Manager in some programmatic way. And the Azure Resource Manager, in its turn, uses the different resource providers to make sure that it configures the compute resources or your networking or storage. And as you can tell, I'm mostly focused from a server virtualization background. But of course, it also enables the Kubernetes and all the other cool functionality and services that are available in Azure. So to further dive into ARM, of course, we had to start, if we're talking about automation and not going through the portal, we had to get familiar with Azure Resource Manager templates, or ARM templates, as I like to call them. And one of the things that hits you first is that those templates are built with JSON formatting. And if you look at the first template format, it still seems pretty straightforward, where you have your parameters section for all the input values that you want to provide, variables for making sure that you have quick and shorten references to objects and resources within your script or within the template. Functions, if you want to use your own built custom functionality in your template, and the resources section that specifies all the Azure resources that you want ARM to create. And for your own purposes, you can also use outputs to make sure that after ARM has deployed your resources, it does return the output that you specified. But if we're zooming in on an ARM template, and please do not be afraid if this kind of overwhelms you, because I have to admit it definitely overwhelmed me the first time I saw that, because I was eager to get started and build my own ARM templates, and then I saw all these different template for the template sections, which kind of discouraged me a little. So I did some more research and was very fortunate to find a quick start guide provided by Microsoft that basically tells you that you can use your Azure portal and the marketplace to, instead of just manually going or still going through all the different tabs to provide all the information to the Azure Resource Manager, you can also use this to create your own custom template by not hitting create, the create button on this screen, but to click on that small, not always very visible link at the bottom saying download a template for automation. And what it does is it guides you through a download page that shows you not only the ARM template that is already pre-created with all the information from the forms and the information that you provided, but it also allows you to download a parameters file that has all the specified information that you just previously entered. So you just simply hit that download button to download your template and parameters file, and then you can have some fun. And when I say fun, I mean that this allows you to have a cool base ARM template that you can then fine-tune and customize to your own needs. And in order to do that, Microsoft also provides a reference guide, which gives great input on all the customizations that you can make for each and every resource within the template. So it provides you with a template format. So it has the example code that you can add to your template. And it even specifies all the different objects and properties that you can configure within the template. So that should give you all the information that you need to place whatever customizations you want to make within the context of an ARM template. And as you see in an example, this is just a quick way for me to add a DNS server registration to my VNet, which is one of the prerequisites for deploying a WVD environment. Another cool resource that we definitely wanted to share with you is that there are special learning paths on Microsoft Learn for building your own ARM templates or using ARM templates for automated deployments. So feel free to check it out because it will definitely help you to get started and to fully understand all the capabilities of ARM templates and the context that you can use them within. And last but not least, for those of you like me that love to have a base to get started with, there's also an Azure Quick Starts templates library, which hosts almost 1,000 templates that are already pre-configured and ready to be used. In this example, it starts with deploying a simple Windows VM, but it can also be deploying an entire infrastructure focused on maybe creating your own domain or even Kubernetes services. And the cool part about the templates is that you can easily incorporate that in, well, I love PowerShell as my scripting language, but in an automated process. So you just simply provide the template that you want to use and a parameter file. And then in my case, I use the new Azure Resource Group deployment commandlet to deploy my template and push it to the Azure Resource Manager. And this is the step where I normally introduce a really cool demo on how quickly it can be used to deploy your resources in Azure. But this is also the moment where I kind of panicked because my ARM template wasn't working as expected. And this is just the standard template that I downloaded from the Azure portal. And then apparently it didn't really work as well for me as I hoped it to be. So even diving into the error messages that clearly states what the error was, I still felt a bit overwhelmed, to be honest, because if you really look at an ARM template, it's first of all, it's a lot of lines of code to go through. And in my case, I had to go back and forth between the resources section, the variables and the parameters to figure out what the exact values were of some of the input. Especially because this template already used linked templates, which means that it basically sends you to another template that is out there somewhere on the internet. To be honest, this is the moment where, as I said, I kind of panicked and called Freek for help because he's not only my WVD ninja, but as you'll soon discover, he's now also my Bicep ninja because he came up with a great solution. And just as a little disclaimer, I do have ARM templates that work perfectly. So this is not a session about dishing the use of ARM templates or stopping you to use that altogether. It's just another way of showing you how you can easily create those ARM templates, because both me and Freek are kind of convinced that the ARM templates will not disappear instantly because, as we said at the beginning, the Azure Resource Manager is still the heart of Azure. So we'll definitely need to be able to talk in ARM templates to the Resource Manager. But as I mentioned, basically I panicked, I called Freek, and he came up with this awesome solution. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Freek can take over and show you all the fun that he has shown me with Project Bicep.
Yes, let me go ahead and share my screen. So you should be able to see that now, and that was a fun introduction. I actually enjoy that you actually put that error still in, because that's something that we all ran into, right? We've all seen those errors and templates fail, and going back into the JSON templates, and like you said, going into all of these linked templates and debugging that. So it's I like that you actually kept that in the deck. That's awesome.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that it probably took me 4 hours till like 2 a.m. to to debug and to figure out where the error was.
Yeah, well, you found it, so that's good. Right, so let's transition now to Project Bicep, and let's first do a quick introduction in case you're not or a little bit less familiar about the technology, or maybe just heard about it. What is it exactly? Project Bicep is a domain-specific language and specifically designed for Azure. So it's a DSL, which means that it allows you to declare your resources in a declarative way when deploying them to the Azure portal. So that's obviously similar to how we've been doing that with ARM templates, like Esther just showed you previously. So just to make that clear, Project Bicep is not going to replace ARM templates in any way. It's going to extend it and build on top of it. So its goal is to drastically simplify the way we're authoring our templates and our JSON templates and our ARM templates, like we just showed you, taking away a lot of the complexity, a lot of the overhead, and trimming down those files to exactly what is needed, making it much more readable and much more easy to author. So it's basically a transparent layer on top of ARM templates. And as we'll see in a demo, it also allows you to transpile your biceps files right into JSON files. So that's the reason why JSON is not going away. So where do we position Project Bicep in the overall infrastructure as code stack, as we saw on the diagram, we started with in this session? So again, we have the Azure Resource Manager, the blue bar in this diagram. It's still the heart of any deployment of any infrastructure as code deployment. So it's basically our entry point into the resource providers that lead us to the various resources we can create and update and delete, but also things like Arc and Kubernetes and GitHub, etc. On top of that blue bar, we still have our ARM templates. So we are still feeding those ARM templates towards the Azure Resource Manager to be able to deploy our resources in a declarative way. So what Bicep does is add an additional layer on top of the ARM templates, which allows you to not have to worry about the ARM templates, but you author your Bicep files instead. And they literally have the extension .bicep, which I thought was kind of funny. We have Bicep files that we start with, and then we transpile it into an ARM template. And that ARM template is then fed into the Azure Resource Manager. That also means that you can use any existing way you're deploying your ARM templates, whether it's like Esther uses PowerShell or DevOps or directly feeding those templates into the ARM portal. You can still do that because we're not replacing ARM in any way. It also has a great modular approach, and we'll take a look at that in a demo as well, which allows you to extract pieces of those code and put them into separate files, separate modular files to reuse them in other projects or in other environments. It's also fully open source and fully transparent, so the entire project, the entire source code is on GitHub and allows you to contribute to that GitHub code as well, to provide examples, to do bug fixes, etc. We're going to share that link to the GitHub at the end of the session as well. So how do you then get started? So if you have the experience with ARM and you want to transition to this Project Bicep, or if you do not have anything with ARM and just want to get started with Project Bicep, what do? It's basically two separate steps. First, you have to install the CLI, which is needed to be able to do that transpiling from the Bicep file towards the JSON file, and it's these lines of code. Now, full disclosure, I did not come up with this code. This is just available on the docs and GitHub pages, but just to give you an idea how you can do that installation automatically on your development machine. Now we have a second step, which is the VS Code extension. And although this is an optional component, I can really encourage you to start installing it because it allows you to do things like tab completion and IntelliSense, etc., to make the authoring even better inside VS Code as your editor. And that's it. So from that moment on, you can start creating your first Bicep file, transpile it into ARM, and then feed it into the Azure portal.
Yeah, and this is why I just love Freek doing the demos, because it already starts with something so easy that you feel that you should just at this moment already get started with Bicep. So
No
take
pressure.
it away.
No pressure. Right, so here we go. So you should be able to see my VS Code, and I have here the install.
No, not yet.
You're not seeing it?
Oh, no, the feed is behind.
Oh,
My apologies.
Okay. So we have the installation PS1 that we just had in the demo as well. So basically what I did on my machine is run this code and then have the CLI and the VS Code extension available. Optionally, you can also go into the marketplace and install it right here from the Bicep link and just install it from this wizard. So let's get started. Let's open up our first Bicep file, which is called main.bicep, which is an empty file. But it is actually a valid Bicep file, although it doesn't contain any content. It's a valid Bicep file, and we'll show you. So I'll just put in the Bicep version command here just to show you what the most recent version that we're at right now. So it's 0.2.328. We'll take a look at the versioning and why we are at this stage at the end of the session as well. So the way you transpile this file into a JSON file is that you say Bicep build, and then the name of the file. So in this case, it's going to be example2. And it's then going to transpile it obviously in a second because it doesn't contain any content. But if you take a look at the JSON that it creates, here is already that empty skeleton of any JSON template. So this should look familiar if you have ARM and JSON template experience. I could feed this template into the Azure portal. It wouldn't deploy anything, but it's a valid template to start with. So let's go ahead and enter some code inside this main Bicep file. And let's create our first resource. So let's create a storage account. We'll give it a name, STG. And we'll browse to storage account. And as you can see, I already have that IntelliSense going on here. So I can take a look at the objects types that I have available. So let's select one, do the equal sign and the brackets. So the first thing you'll notice is that we have the variable, so the resource type, as well as the API version into a single string, which was already different strings in the ARM template. So if I do now a control space, I get an overview of the properties that this resource wants to have. So for example, I can specify the name. Let's since it is Azure Thursday, let's do that. I need to specify the kind of resource storage account. So let's do that, a blob storage. I obviously need to specify a location. So let's do East US, simply because that's the one that is easy to type. I was going to say, and then I made a typo. But and the last property is the what is the SKU, right? And the SKU is multiple properties. So as soon as we hit that column, we get the brackets here, and I know I need to specify the name. So I get an easy selection and have the previous LRS. And that's it. So we now created our first resource, which is a storage account in the Azure portal. So saving this file and running the build process again, we have the JSON file, and let's open it up side by side so we can see some comparison. Now you probably noticed that the one on the left is way easier to read than the one on the right, which has all of these brackets and semicolons or commas going on, right? So we already went from 8 lines of code towards 17 on the right-hand side. So you saw me use a lot of the IntelliSense inside the VS Code. Full disclosure, that is also available for ARM templates, right? The drop-down list with the resource types, etc. But what JSON doesn't have and what Bicep does have is it allows me to point to a resource that I previously declared. So let me show you an example. If I take a look at an output I want to create, let's call it STG out. And that's going to be a string. And that's going to be equal to, and as you can see, I have the STG available here, which is the resource I have just declared. So I can do STG properties, primary endpoint, and then blob. And that's it. So I'm now referring to a property of the object that I previously declared. So taking a look at what that looks like inside JSON, if we transpile it again, take a look at the easy way I can reference that property versus using the reference function, using the resource ID function, then having to concatenate this string, taking a look at the variable, and then doing all of these stuff, right? So it's a lot a lot of magic, a lot of voodoo going on here in the JSON side, not really readable compared to the one on the left.
Yeah, that would definitely save me a couple of hours.
Probably, yeah. So adding a parameter is just as easy. I can do param, and I can say, for example, the STG name. So let's make it a parameter instead of a static value. It's obviously going to be a string. And let's also give it a default value, which in this case is that same Azure Thursday. And then we can replace this parameter with simply that, even without the quote. Let's save it again. Let's do a transpile again and take a look at the easy way to define a parameter on a single line, including the default value, whereas the way you would do that in ARM with all of the brackets and the commas and the semicolons going on. So just to give you an example of how easy it is to get started versus the JSON that we all experienced over the last couple of years.
Yeah, don't make me start a comment about flexing your muscles and showing off the power of Bicep.
I won't. So let's shift gears and take it one step further even and take a look at a Bicep code that deploys multiple objects. In this case, a virtual machine. So we just saw the first Bicep file with a single object with only one parameter. This is already some more advanced stuff. So as you can see, I have a couple of parameters and variables here that I declare with a couple of default values as well. And also notice that it's super easy to also concatenate these values with each other. So for example, if I want to create the default VNet nickname, I can take the previously declared variable and just add the postfix, in this case, -nick, just like that. We'll take a look at what it looks like in JSON in just a second. What I also want to show you is that inside this Bicep file, I have multiple resources that I'm going to be creating. So I have a VNet that I'm creating here. I have a virtual NIC, and I have a VM. So if you're familiar with VMs in Azure, you probably know that I cannot create a virtual machine without having a network adapter. And I cannot create a network adapter without having a VNet and a subnet in order to have that point to that as well. So that means that we need to tell the ARM engine eventually in which order these objects need to be created. So first the VNet, then the network adapter, and then the VM. But as you can see inside my Bicep, I do not anywhere have that declaration there, that I have a dependency on these objects. So how does that work? Let's go ahead and build this file. So it's going to be example number 4. And let's open up these files side by side again. And again, I will not keep on saying this, but we went from 94 lines towards 125. So we're getting close to a huge JSON file. But what I wanted to show you is, well, first of all, doing the concatenation stuff, which is just like this, compared to the magic that's going on here to do that. And this is even the more simple one. We've seen much more complex concatenations. But what I wanted to show you is the network interface here and how these objects depend on each other. So notice that the JSON code actually contains the depends on section. So this is us telling the ARM engine the creation of this object depends on the creation of another object. But I do not have that in my Bicep code. So how did it end up there? The reason is that I'm using the property here again. So I'm specifying the VNet, the ID of the VNet, and this VNet is actually coming from the resource right here. So by doing that, the Bicep engine, the transpile engine, knows that it needs to have the depends on section in there and automatically adds that for you. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on here with the resource ID function, and again, some static values and the VNet name. So it automatically added that for us as a depends on section. You can still, of course, do explicit depends ons. If you still have other objects that are dependent on those objects, you can still declare them like this. But for the most part, you probably won't, because you will always be referencing to properties of another resource.
So a lot less chance of having errors in your ARM templates.
A little less chance, yeah. I wouldn't say a lot. But yeah, it definitely helps in authoring because the depends on section is definitely something that you forget and you You run into that when you are actually deploying or doing the what if towards the Azure portal, when you realize, oh, wait a minute, these objects depend on each other. So it's a pretty cool feature that they have that as an implicit in there now.
Yeah, for those of you who are watching the recording, if you go back to the screen with the errors of my ARM template, it was focused on the network interface card not being there. So somehow I missed the depends on.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so let's take it even one step further and take a look at the modular approach. But before we do that, let's actually deploy something that we just created. So I have the Azure portal here. And what I have here is an empty resource group. It doesn't contain any objects yet. And just to show you that these transpiled versions actually work, let's deploy this the JSON file that creates the VM. So in this case, I'm using the AZ resource group deployment PowerShell commandlet, pointing to the resource group name, and then pointing to the version 4 example of the JSON. So not passing the bicep, but passing the actual transpiled JSON. So let's go ahead and run that. And it asks me for a local admin of this machine. I'm just going to type some random characters here because I'm not going to use this VM. But let's switch to the Azure portal and take a look at what it is deploying. And now we have the deployment of our virtual machines with the 3 objects. So first the virtual network, then the network adapter, and now the virtual machine, because of those dependence on sections in that in the JSON code. But just to show you that in the end, we're still dealing with JSON. We're still passing those JSON templates towards the Azure portal. So it's going to probably take a couple of seconds to finish, and we'll see that same result in this in the dialog as well. So while we wait for that to finish, let's take a look at the last example is doing the modular approach. So these were all just single bicep files doing a single deployment towards a single resource group. But what if I have multiple resource groups, multiple objects, and multiple dependencies in there? And as a matter of fact, the demo just finished. So let's take a look at the portal. It actually deployed and it is available. So going back to the resource group, here's that virtual machine with a network adapter, the disk, and the network. So let's go to the modular one. So I have a main.bicep file to start with. And as you can see, this is already a pretty big bicep file. Even for bicep, it is 300 lines of code. But what it does is it has a big section of parameters. And as you can see, I have a lot of default values here as well. That's just for demo sakes, right? Normally you would extract these and have them inside a parameter file when you are deploying it towards Azure. But just for the demo, I have left them inside here. I also have a couple of secure strings here with passwords and Azure AD, tenants, etc. And the thing that I'm doing here is I'm setting the target scope to subscription. So normally when you deploy a JSON file towards the Azure portal, the target scope is usually a resource group, right? But now we're deploying towards multiple resource groups. So we need to make sure that the scope of this deployment is the subscription level and not a separate resource group. Speaking of resource groups, we are actually creating them inside this bicep file as well. So we have here the resource declaration for all of the resource groups. So we're taking a post and prefix and then having a network one, the backplane for my Windows virtual desktop in this case, WVD hosts, monitoring one, a file services one, and a key vault one. So about 8 or 9 different resource groups we are creating from this main bicep file. We still have other objects, other resources we're creating here. For example, a VNet definition. We're creating a role assignment in here. But now we get to the module part. So anything above this is just another bicep file with parameters, with variables and resources. But we now have our first declaration of a module. So this means that I'm creating a module referring to a module, which is actually another bicep file. So in case you're wondering, there's absolutely no difference between the main bicep itself and a modular bicep file. There's nothing you need to do for that. It's just another bicep file. But since we're referencing it from a main bicep file, it is included in this deployment. So we need to specify the file name and of course the scope where we are deploying this. And then we are going to pass all of the parameters to this module. So these parameters were all collected above in this file as parameter for this deployment. And then we are passing them to each of these modules. So this is just an example of the 6.1. But as you can see on the left-hand side, we have 6.1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 6, which contain different modules for different purposes. So I have my monitoring, my Azure Image Builder here, my file services, my key vault, etc. Notice I also have this numbering inside. Now that's not mandatory, just to make it easier to understand and to explain which module calls which other modules. So we have the main 6, which calls the 6.1, for example, but also the 6.2. And then inside the 6.2, I am, for example, creating some resources here, but I'm also calling other modules from this module to have a nested module in there, which is for the template VM and for the peering, etc. So that's the way these modules work. So let's go ahead and transpile this file. So again, we are going to say bicep build, and it's going to be example number 6. And if we open this file up, and I will not do it side by side because it's not easy to read, we end up with a JSON file containing 2,000, above 2,000 lines, which is interesting because we were starting with about 300. So how did that happen?
Obviously, we're just showing off now.
We are. So the reason that happens is that when we do the transpile of the main.bicep, it not only transpiles the main.bicep, but also all of the other modules that were called from that bicep file. All right, so this JSON file contains all of the resource declarations of all of these modules into one single JSON file. As you can see, it's a lot of code to read, right? But what I wanted to show you is the way it works. For example, let's take a look at the networking module. So here you see me call the module, for example, for the peering. So let's see if we can find that inside the JSON file. And what I want to show you is not this part, that we're actually having separate deployments here. So each module that we call from a bicep file eventually becomes a new nested deployment, in this case, an incremental deployment for the overall JSON. That's the one of the deployments that Esther also referred to as in her earlier talk about the incremental stuff that's going on. So let's, without further ado, let's actually deploy this into the Azure portal and see what happens. So in this case, I'm using the new AZ deployment because I'm creating multiple resource groups. So I cannot point to a specific one, but I need to point to the overall Azure subscription. And let's run it. And let's see what happens. So let's switch to the Azure portal again. And since we are creating a couple of resource groups, you should be able to see them show up here. So let's wait for that to happen.
So in the meantime, there was a question in the chat, Freek, that asks if Bicep is mainly used for resources or if it can also be used to set RBAC or policies.
Yeah, you can do that. So anything that you can do as a JSON template, you can do in Bicep. And we'll get to how far Bicep is in terms of feature parity at the end of this session. But basically, the end result will be that anything that you can declare using an ARM template, you can also do that using Bicep and then transpile it into ARM.
So, and another question from James is if there's a limit to the code lines in a Bicep file.
That's a great question. I didn't run into it. I don't think so, but if I do, I'll I'll let you know. Interesting question.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, we have seen the creation of the resource groups, right? So just click refresh here, and all of these resource groups were created by the ARM templates. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. Also taking a look at the time we have left. So as an example, in this resource group, we have all of the objects, if you're familiar with that are needed for a Windows virtual desktop deployment with our host pools, application groups, and workspaces. What was created is also a couple of file services storage accounts. So I have my storage account here, and inside those storage accounts, different containers have been created for my scripts and for my Azure Image Builder software. I have my networking that we saw in an example before. So a VNet was been created here with a couple of subnets for my production and for my acceptance environment. And I have an entirely built Azure Image Builder process here as well, which allows me to create template images for my Windows Virtual Desktop deployments in this case. So I have my image definitions, my identities, and my shared image gallery. All of those were created just now by the Bicep project. So
we're production ready.
We are, yeah. Let's have some coffee and. So it's going to take a couple of seconds more before this completes, but as you can see, it all went pretty smooth with all these objects being created in the Azure portal. So let's take a look at a really quick last demo. The last thing I want to show you is actually the decompiling of these objects to also show you that that is possible. So instead of starting and the actual deployment now, I'll just finish, as you can see, no errors here, so that looks good.
Rub it in.
Let's take a look at the decompile real quick. So let's now start with a Bicep file. And let's remove that because we're going to transpile back from the JSON. So here I have a JSON file, in this case, creating again a virtual desktop deployment with 3 resources in here. And what if I want to decompile this object back to a Bicep file? I simply say decompile, and then the name of this demo file, which is number 7. And as you can see here, the decompile is currently at a best effort process. It's not 100% feature parity yet, but as you can see on the left-hand side, we now have a Bicep file being created from my JSON file. So this eventually will also make it possible for all of your existing JSON templates to be decompiled back to Bicep and then reused as Bicep going forward. Definitely a great feature for if you have a lot of ARM experience and want to take your existing ARM templates back to Bicep. So I think enough demos looking at the time. So let me switch back to the slide deck so we can provide you with some last information.
Yeah, I was going to say you can never have enough demos, Freek, but
yeah,
but due to the time, yeah.
Exactly. So we wanted to show you a little roadmap of where Bicep came from and where it's going to. So we started off with the 0.1 version back in August last year. And as you can see, it had a lot of features being added over the last couple of months. We are now at a 0.2.3.8 version, very close to the 0.3 version. And right now we are already at 90% feature parity compared to ARM templates, which is really, really great. So the one thing we are all waiting for, and if you have been developing ARM templates, you know this, is the loops. So being able to have a single piece of code run multiple times inside a loop without having declared multiple times. So that is definitely coming in the 0.3 version, which we are expecting somewhere this month, or at least in early March to become available. And also the full decompilation of we just saw of the Bicep code back to the JSON code back to Bicep. So at that point, at the 0.3 version, it will probably be production ready as well. So just to explain what that means, Bicep itself is into preview right now, but that does not mean that all of the JSON code that we create with it is preview. That's not at all the case. So anything that you create with Bicep right now, the JSON file that you create, is ready for production use. It's just that some things will change in the syntax of the actual Bicep file, which could allow for some breaking changes. So speaking of those, I think, Esther, you wanted to cover the 2 breaking changes that we know about are going to happen soon.
Yes. So those of you who already follow Project Bicep on GitHub will see that there is a lot of feedback from the community directly being processed. So one of or 2 of the cool feature requests that they already incorporated is what they call parameter decorators. And this allows you to, as you can see, have an even more intuitive configuration of, in this example, the allowed values for your parameter. And that will make it definitely a lot more powerful to use Bicep in an intuitive way. The other thing, if we're looking at issue 569, is that one of the feedback was that we currently cannot reuse predefined parameters as output parameters or values. Currently, we need to create a separate variable for that. What you saw in the demo is that for the STG, Freek also said STG out when he was declaring the output. And what they are working on right now is to make sure that that parameter can be easily reused because it's using the same space, that it can easily be reused in an output declaration as well. So those are like two already very fast incorporated improvements for Bicep.
Yeah, and the great thing is that these are all open. So these links and these issues here, they just go back to the GitHub page where you actually can see what's going on and what's going to happen in the near future. So to give you a call to action before you let you go is visit aka.ms/bicep. It is the short link to the Bicep GitHub page by Microsoft, which contains a lot of tutorials, documentation, example variables, a lot of community efforts as well. I, for one, have been contributing to that GitHub as well. So there's a lot of, I think, already hundreds of different Bicep files available for you to get started. So with that, we thank you for your attention. I hope it was valuable, and we sure as hell enjoyed it, right, Esther?
Yeah, and fun. I hope you forgive us for running over just like a minute.
1 minute.
So enjoy Bicep, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Freek or me, and we'd be happy to help you.
For sure.
Really cool. Thank you very much. Nice stuff. I will start using it.
Yeah, for sure.
We have.
Oh, we already have the pen.
From the, we have one question left from the watches. How do you pull in the modules? Do they need to be stored locally, or can you reference them, maybe from a Git repository?
Yeah, right now it's locally. So what you do is when you have your main Bicep file, the one that I showed you, and you make a reference to another module, that needs to be a file on the local system at that point. And that's because the transpilation process assumes that all those objects, all those files are available locally. But great question.
All right, cool, thanks. Well, I think no more questions, Roland?
No, that was the last one.
No.
I really loved the session, energy, and you do it very well together. It was, you always see these awkward handovers, and you did it brilliantly. It was a very good session. Thank you.
Really nice. Yeah.
That's awesome feedback. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's great.
Well, then this is already the end of the evening.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. So thanks for watching, everybody. And of course, a big thanks to our sponsors down here. Not possible without them. And yeah, I think next month will also be amazing, Roland. What do you think?
Yeah, that will be a leap for us because we're going to try a bit of a different format, I think, with some very nice guests. And we'll, I think we'll do an Ignite Roundup. Is that what we're going to do? Does that describe it a bit? I think so. Yeah. Well, the days leading up to our event, on the first day, there is Microsoft Ignite, of course, part 2. I don't know if that is the most accurate description. It is, I think, part 1 for 2021. But well, never mind. It's going to be 3 days of Ignite and a lot of information. Yeah. And I think we'll pick what is most interesting. And we have some amazing guests planned. If it all works out. So. But we won't do any spoilers, I think, right?
No, just check our socials in the upcoming weeks, and just visit the next session again. So that would be great, I guess. Yeah. Well, then this is it for today.
It is.
Thank you all, and hopefully see you next time again.
Yes, thank you. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
toch weer bang om iets.